Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you join from. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today, cloud native. Now, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Let's discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Before jumping into cloud native, now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud native. Now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, cloud native, depending on where you join from. Discuss. Today, I'm going to talk about something very much relevant to the telco industry today. Cloud native. Jumping into cloud now, I thought of bringing good morning, good The industry, what are we really trying to do with these terms and also the practical application of those? Now, the reason why we discuss all these things today is because of a specific business problem. And this business problem has been quite consistent, and the graphs that I'm going to show is something that we have been discussing for the last several years. With the telco industry moving from voice dominant business model to data dominant business model, we see the traffic is increasing. It's not just the transported traffic in terms of so many bits per second transported, but also the amount of bytes stored, so many bytes, so many petabytes these days. So the traffic is increasing. As a result, telcos are trying to sort of incorporate these capabilities in their systems and networks. As a result, they have to spend capex. So the cost is also increasing. But if you really take the revenues and the number of customers, most markets, if you really take mobile markets, we see the number of customers actually sort of stagnated. And the revenues are, though increasing, it's not the way the operators would want the revenues to be increased. So as a result, we have this famous decoupling between network traffic and the operator revenues. And for the last several years, we see as a whole in the industry across the globe, this gap is actually widening. So we wanted solution as an industry, as an ecosystem. So one way is bringing the cost down. On the other side, if you really take, it is increasing the revenue up. So because this is really a business problem, even though the solutions are coming from technical angle, the real problem is a business problem. So we have things like automation, virtualization, and DevOps coming in terms of bringing costs down, introduction of SDN, NFV, and cloud. And on the increasing of revenue side, it is all about bringing in the agility and flexibility the software very much inherently has in terms of bringing in new services and changing, modifying services and sort of going to market fast and also meeting customer expectation fast. So this is the type of business problem that we had and also we still have. Now, if you really want to bring all these discussions to one slide and like sort of include all the things in one slide, the business side and the technical side together, it's all about, it starts from the business problem, the business transformation that the operators want to have, moving away from the traditional communication service provider business to digital service provider. So I have deliberately put COSP instead of CSP because CSP sometimes stands for cloud service providers as well. So moving away from communication service providers to digital service providers. Now, what underpins that, if you really go into the technical side a little bit, is actually going from networks to platforms. The traditional way of thinking the communication service provider networks as a platform in the digital service provider domain. If you go further down, if you really look at networks, you realize that networks are nothing but hardware boxes which we need to configure. But in terms of a platform, we actually abstract all these hardware capabilities into software, and we have software and cloud native going forward. If you go further, we can, though the hardware, software, and cloud native pieces are sort of technical, to achieve these things, we really need the people factor very importantly. So with hardware technology side, we need hardware mindset to be transformed to software mindset, and the software mindsets now need to be transformed to cloud native mindset. So if you compare the transformation of technology and the transformation of people is not easy, even though it is very much easily explained in the PowerPoint. Going further down, we see old generation networks, or OGNs, transform to next generation networks, and next generation networks are virtualized. So we have software generation networks and virtual next generation networks. And going forward, we actually don't talk about networks much, but we are talking about telco cloud in the telco domain. So finally, if you really go further deep into the technologies, the real technologies that we really use to make this transformation, we understand that we started with traditional circuit switching, legacy TDM type of networks, then moved to packet IP-based, Ethernet-based networks, and introduced softwareization, network virtualization, and cloud a little bit. And then going forward, we're talking about a fully cloudification in the telco domain. Now, one of the advantages we see is that even if you are late, because of all these legacy of 160 plus years in the telco domain, it's not easy to transform from hardware to software. So even if you are late in bringing in softwareization, now we have a golden opportunity to actually to move away from end-to-end and directly go to cloudification. But with a certain condition, if you have the right skills, knowledge, and education within yourself, moving away from this hardware mindset of networks to more of a implementation of a cloud, telco cloud, is it's not really difficult. With that background, if you really take what is actually happening in the industry as an ecosystem, you see the standards, whether it is de facto standards or the standards which are these days predominantly coming from the cloud communities, the standards are moving quite fast. I mean, very fast, because every day we see that new projects are being introduced, new projects are being graduated, incubated, etc. And also we see vendors relatively fast in adopting those technologies, actually sort of bringing those standards to their equipment and the software capabilities. And if you really take the end customers of service providers, mostly the enterprise customers, they're also moving their critical workloads to public cloud and hybrid cloud, private cloud, etc. They're also adopting quite fast. But in between, we have these operators, CSPs, and the other telcos, which are very much late in transforming themselves. I'm talking about at the broader context, quite late, because we have few examples where few tier one operators are moving quite fast, giving good examples to the industry. But as a whole, the operators are relatively slow in terms of transforming themselves and catching up with the other stakeholders in the industry. So if you take, for example, network functions, I would call that as network function evaporation. We have functions which are related to the networks, and we so with the virtual network functions, we have now VNFs, virtualization of network functions. Because we have VNFs, now we call the previous versions of the functions are sort of physical network functions, or PNFs. Now, we did not stop there. We actually moved from VNFs to CNFs, and now we are talking about cloud native network functions. Really, these network functions are implemented in a cloud native environment or in the cloud. So we see this trend as well, moving from PNFs to VNFs to CNFs. So if you take SDN together with the hardware defined networking and these PNFs, VNFs, and CNFs into the context of network transformation, you see we are trying to move away from physical network functions and hardware defined networking to more of a cloud type of a environment or a platform. But we see in between the transformation is not that easy. We have to deal with a mix of both worlds. For example, we have to deal with physical things, virtual things, software things, cloud things all together. And we need to try and sort of make the migration period small so that we can make the transformation fast. Now, the reason we are so much comfortable with the start, which is the PNFs and the hardware defined networking, is that though the systems are or the networks are complex, we actually were able to manage the complexity because we mastered the complexity in terms of configurations. Now, same thing applies here. If you have the right skills, knowledge, and education, you can always sort of handle the migration period. And we see a lot of telcos are actually doing that. Going forward, we see we need to deal with not just PNFs, VNFs, but cloud native network functions and also software defined networking, many things becoming software defined. And whether this ultimate environment or the platform is complex or simple will be actually decided by the amount of knowledge, skills, and education you have as a telco. So going forward, in terms of both technical and business angle, if you really look at what are the long-term assets for a telco. Now, there's no doubt for any organization, the long-term asset are the people who work in that organization. So same for telcos. So if you keep the people aside or the workforce, which is the biggest asset, but if you really take the other physical assets that we have routers, switches, optical gear, data center, servers, etc. But the way things are improving, the way things are actually transformed in the industry with new capabilities, new improvements, we see the lifetime of all these hardware boxes and software capabilities are very much within the horizon of 5 years or less. So going forward, the long-term assets will actually become the buildings and the ducts and the fibers and also the towers if you are a mobile or wireless operator. But other than that, we cannot really identify anything as long-term hardware assets for telcos. Everything, the moment you move from hardware to software and then to cloud, you see they are very much changing in days or minutes, depending on the services that you're offering. So the original objectives of the transformation were automation, virtualization, now containerization, and then DevOps and also DevSecOps work practices, and also flexibility and agility. Those were the original objectives. And those objectives will still remain same. And going forward with cloud, those are not objective, but with cloud, we have new opportunities or new capabilities bringing in things like the openness and the ability to have microservices, the modularity, and the massive scalability, things like going hyperscale, and also avoiding vendor lock-in, because you really don't have to depend on hardware. You have all the tools that you can actually manage hardware using software. So you have an immense flexibility and power in your hand as a telco, because now you have the full flexibility in handling on your own software. And also simple. And again, it is related to this amount of knowledge, skills, and education that you have. So it's all about the wish, will, and the skill that will decide whether you're transforming from hardware-centric to software-centric to cloud-centric type of platforms and systems. Okay, Another interesting aspect, again, in the whole ecosystem that we see is new players are actually coming into the telco domain. Now, for example, if you take all these big cloud players like Google, they have Google Cloud for telecommunications, and they have Anthos, which is the on-premise version of the Google Cloud. Same for AWS. AWS has AWS telecommunications and Outposts. They are on-premise version of the AWS cloud. Azure and Azure for Operators and Azure Stack. So all the cloud players are now offering cloud native and cloud native telco type of services to telcos, especially targeting at 5G. And we see traditional virtualization type of vendors like VMware. They have VMware telco cloud infrastructure, which is the on-premise version of, if you really want to build cloud native infrastructure within the telco domain, they have now these capabilities available. So we see a lot of people who are in the traditional telco hardware type of business are now moving to hardware to software, and from software to sort of cloud type of business models. Couple of interesting examples, one coming from Germany, Telefonica actually trying to sort of implement all their 5G core functionalities within AWS public cloud. And then we have another example from Japan, which is Rakuten, which is a fully virtualized 5G network from the RAN up to the core network. So we see, though Telefonica and Rakuten are two big players in the industry, we see these things are practically implemented by operators. So these are two good examples where the other telcos also can follow up. And I think as a result, we will have a lot of new standards and new opportunities and capabilities in the industry, where it will make the lives of the other operators easy to sort of make the transformation themselves. If you look at the cloud native ecosystem, you have something like 20.5 trillion market capitalization and 65.34 billion funding for all these cloud native projects. Some of the projects are, like if you take Kubernetes, and other projects are very much used in the industry, and we have a large list of projects and several other components within this ecosystem, which looks very promising even for the telco industry. So as software is going to take the center stage for telcos, and most of this software actually coming from open source. Now the question comes, how do you want your open source software to be? Like you want most of these open source, if you really look at the open source code, they're free. It's open source, and most of them are open source free software. So how do you want your open source software to be? It's free like a beer or free like a puppy. So it depends on how much knowledge, skills, and education that you have as a telco. So the amount of capability that you have as a telco to sort of master software will actually decide how we are going to succeed in the long-term journey of your transformation. So in summary, softwareization or now cloudification of networks and systems is key for telco transformation. And however, it is difficult to switch from hardware mindset from software mindset and now to cloud mindset. Though it is easy to transform your technology or the hardware or the systems, in technology's perspective, changing the mindsets of people working with you is not easy. There are many challenges, mostly non-technical, and those need to be actually handled by the operators themselves, mostly to do with skills, knowledge, and education, and also to do with the culture that you have within your organization. So skills will be the most important than anything else. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.